Habits. Nilima was none too pleased by Kusuma's visit. That evening she said to me, "Do you know that Kusum came to see me today? She was trying to get me involved with that business in Morichapi. They want the trust to help them set up some medical facilities there." "So what did you say?" "I told them there's nothing we could do," Nilima said in her flattest, most unyielding voice. "Why can't you help them?" I protested. "They are human beings. They need some medical attention as much as people do anywhere else." "Nirmal, it's impossible," she said. "Those people are squatters. That land doesn't belong to them. It's government property. How can they just seize it? If they're allowed to remain, people will think every island in the tide country can be seized. What will become of the forest, the environment?" To this, I answered that Lucy Barry was forest too once. It too once belonged to the government. Yet Sir Daniel Hamilton was allowed to take it over in order to create his experiment. And all these years, Nilima had often said that she admired what he did. What was the difference then? Were the dreams of these settlers less valuable than those of a man like Sir Daniel just because he was a rich Shahad and they were impoverished refugees? "But Nirmal," she said, "what Sir Daniel did happened a long time ago. Just imagine what would become of this whole area if everybody started doing the same thing today. The whole forest would disappear." "Look, Nilima," I said, "that island, Morichapi, wasn't really forest, even before the settlers came. Parts of it were already being used by the government for plantations and so on. What's being said about the danger to the environment is just a sham, in order to evict these people who have nowhere else to go." "Be that as it may," said Nilima, "I simply cannot allow the trust to get involved in this. There's too much at stake for us. You're not involved in the day-to-day business of running the hospital, so you have no idea of how hard we've had to work to stay on the right side of the government. If politicians turn against us, we're finished. I can't take that chance." It was all clear to me now. "So, Nilima," I said, "what you're saying is that your position has nothing to do with the rights and wrongs of the case. You're not going to help these people because you want to stay on the right side of the government?" Nilima made her hands into fists and put them on her waist. "Nirmal, you have no idea of what it takes to do anything practical," she said. "You live in a dream world, a haze of poetry and fuzzy ideas about revolution. To build something is not the same as dreaming of it. Building is always a matter of well-chosen compromises." I rarely argued with Nilima when she used this tone of voice, but this time I too wouldn't let go. "I don't see that this compromise is well chosen." This made Nilima even angrier. "Nirmal," she said, "I want you to remember something. It was for your sake that we first came to Lucy Barry, because your political involvements got you into trouble and endangered your health. There was nothing for me here, no family, friends, or a job. But over the years, I've built something real, something useful, something that has helped many people in small ways. All these years, you've sat back and judged me. But now it's there in front of you, in front of your eyes, this hospital. And if you ask me what I will do to protect it, let me tell you, I will fight for it like a mother fights to protect her children. The hospital's future, its welfare, they mean everything to me and I will not endanger them. I have asked very little of you all this time, but I'm asking you now, stay away from Morichapi. I know the government will not allow the settlers to stay, and I know also that they will be vengeful towards anyone who gets mixed up in this business. If you get involved with those settlers, you will be endangering my life's work. Just keep that in mind. That's all I ask." There was nothing more to say. No one knew better than I the sacrifices she had made for me. I recognized that my idea of teaching the children of Morichapi was just an old man's illusion, nothing more than a way of postponing an inevitable superannuation. I tried to purge it from my head. The new year, 1979, came in, and soon afterwards Nilima left to go off on one of her periodic fundraising tours for the hospital. A rich Marwari family in Calcutta had agreed to donate a generator. A cousin of hers had become a minister in the state government and she wanted to see him. There was even to be a trip to New Delhi to meet with a senior official in Prime Minister Moraji Desai's government. All of this had to be tended to. On the morning of Nilima's departure, I went to the jetty to see her off, and just before leaving, she said, Nirmal, remember what I said to you about Morichapi. Remember. The boat sailed away, and I went up to my study. With my schoolmaster's duties at an end, time hung heavy on my hands. I opened my notebooks for the first time in many years, thinking that perhaps I would write something. I had long thought of compiling a book about the Tide country, a volume that would include all I knew, all the facts I had gathered over these years. For several days I sat at my desk gazing at the Mahona of the Remangal in the distance. I remembered how when I first came to Lucibari the sky would be darkened by birds at sunset. Many years had passed since I'd seen such flights of birds. When I first noticed their absence, I thought they would soon come back, but they had not. I remembered a time when at low tide the mud banks would turn scarlet with millions of swarming crabs. That color began to fade long ago, and now it is never seen any more. Where had they gone, I wondered, those millions of swarming crabs, those birds? Age teaches you to recognize the signs of death. You do not see them suddenly. You become aware of them very slowly over a period of many, many years. Now it was as if I could see those signs everywhere, not just in myself, but in this place that I had lived in for almost 30 years. The birds were vanishing, the fish were dwindling, and from day to day the land was being reclaimed by the sea. What would it take to submerge the Tide country? Not much. A minuscule change in the level of the sea would be enough. As I contemplated this prospect, it seemed to me that this might not be such a terrible outcome. These islands had seen so much suffering, so much hardship and poverty, so many catastrophes, so many failed dreams that perhaps humankind would not be ill served by its loss. Then I thought of Morichapi. What I saw as a veil of tears was for others truly more precious than gold. I remembered the story Kusum had told me of her exile in Bihar and how she had dreamed of returning to this place, of seeing once more these rich fields of mud, these trembling tides. I thought of all the others who had come with her to Morichapi and of all they had braved to find their way there. In what way could I ever do justice to this place? What could I write of it that would equal the power of their longing and their dreams? What indeed would be the form of the lines? Even this I could not resolve. Would they flow as rivers did, or would they follow rhythms as did the tides? I put my books aside and went to stand on the roof to gaze across the waters. The sight was almost unbearable to me at that moment. I felt myself torn between my wife and the woman who had become the muse I'd never had, between the quiet persistence of everyday change and the heady excitement of revolution, between prose and poetry. Most haunting of all was I overreaching myself even in conceiving of these confusions? What had I ever done to earn the right to address such questions? I had reached the point where, as the poet says, we tell ourselves, maybe what's left for us is some tree on a hillside we can look at day after day, and the perverse affection of a habit that liked us so much it never let go. A sunset. Near the end of the day, when the sun was dipping towards the Bidya's Mahona, Pia decided to take advantage of Kanai's invitation. She went up to the roof of the guest house and knocked on the door of the study. Ke? He blinked as he opened the door, and she had the impression that she had woken him from a trance. Did I disturb you? No, not really. I thought I'd take in the sunset. Good idea. I'm glad you came up. He put away the cardboard covered book he was holding and went to join her by the parapet. In the distance, the sky and the Mahona were aflame with the colors of the setting sun. It's magnificent, isn't it? Said Kanai. It is. Kanai proceeded to point out Lucy Barry's sights, the village maiden, the Hamilton house, the school, the hospital, and so on. By the end of the recital, they had done a turn around the roof and were facing in the direction of the path they had followed that morning, looking towards the staff quarters of the Lucy Barry Hospital. Pia knew they were both thinking about the morning's meeting. I'm glad it went well today, she said. Did you think it went well? Yes, I did, she said. At least Fakir agreed to go on to this expedition. In the beginning, I didn't think he would. I didn't know what to think, frankly, Kanai said. He's such a peculiar, sulky fellow. One doesn't know what to expect. Believe me, said Pia. He's very different when he's out on the water. But are you sure you'll be all right with him? Said Kanai. For several days? Yes, I'm sure. She was aware of a certain awkwardness in discussing Fakir with him, especially because she could tell that he was still smarting from the silent snub of the morning. Quietly, she said, Tell me about Fakir's mother. What was she like? Kanai stopped to consider this. Fakir looks a lot like her, he said, but it's hard to see any other resemblance. Kusum was spirited, tough, and full of fun and laughter, not like him at all. And what happened to her? It's a long story, said Kanai, and I don't know all of it. All I can tell you is that she was killed in some kind of confrontation with the police. Pia caught her breath. How did that happen? She joined a group of refugees who had occupied an island nearby. The land belonged to the government, so there was a standoff and many people died. That was in 1979. Fakir must have been 5 or 6. But Horan Noskor took him in after his mother's death. Has been a father to him ever since. So Fakir wasn't born here? No, said Kanai. He was born in Bihar. His parents were living there at the time. His mother came back there when his father died. Pia remembered the family she had imagined for Fakir, the parents she had given him, and the many siblings. She was ashamed by her lack of insight. Well, that's one thing we have in common then, she said, Fakir and me. What? Growing up without a mother. Did you lose your mother when you were little? Said Kanai. I wasn't as little as he was, said Pia. My mother died of cancer when I was 12, but actually I felt I'd lost her long before. Why? Because she'd kind of cut herself off from us, my dad and me. She was a depressive, you see, and her condition got worse over the years. It must have been very hard for you, said Kanai. Not as hard as it was for her, said Pia. She was like an orchid in a way, frail and beautiful and dependent on the love and labor of many, many people. She was the kind of person who should never have strayed too far from home. In Seattle she had no one, no friends, no servants, no job, no life. My father, on the other hand, was a perfect immigrant, driven, hard-working, successful. He was busy getting on with his career, and I was absorbed in the usual kid stuff. I guess my mother kind of fell through the cracks. At some point, she just gave up. Kanai put his hand on hers and gave it a squeeze. I'm sorry. There was a catch in his voice that surprised Pia. She had judged him to be too self-absorbed to pay much attention to other people, yet his sympathy now seemed genuine. I don't get it, she said with a smile. You say you're sorry for me, but you don't seem to have much sympathy for Fakir, even though you knew his mother. How come? His face hardened and he gave a snort of ironic laughter. So far as Fakir is concerned, I'm afraid my sympathies are mainly with his wife. What do you mean? Didn't you feel her this morning? Said Kanai. Just imagine how hard it must be to live with someone like Fakir while also trying to provide for a family and keep a roof over your head. If you consider her circumstances, her caste, her upbringing, it's very remarkable that she's had the forethought to figure out how to get by in today's world. And it isn't just that she wants to get by, she wants to do well. She wants to make a success of her life. Pia nodded. I get it. She understood now that for Kanai there was a certain reassurance in meeting a woman like Moina in such a place as Lucy Barry. It was as if her very existence were a validation of the choices he had made in his own life. It was important for him to believe that his values were at bottom, egalitarian, liberal, meritocratic. It reassured him to be able to think, what I want for myself is no different from what everybody wants, no matter how rich or poor. Everyone who has any drive, any energy, wants to get on in the world. Moina is the proof. Pia understood too that this was a looking glass in which a man like Fakir could never be anything other than a figure glimpsed through a rear-view mirror, a rapidly diminishing presence, a ghost from the perpetual past that was Lucy Barry. But she guessed also that despite its newness and energy, the country Kanai inhabited was full of these ghosts, these unseen presences, whose murmurings could never quite be silenced no matter how loud you spoke. Pia said, You really like Mona, don't you? I admire her, said Kanai. That's how I would put it. I know you do, Pia said. But has it occurred to you that she might look a little different from Fakir's angle? What do you mean? Just ask yourself this, said Pia. How would you like to be married to her? Kanai laughed, and when he spoke again, his voice had an edge of flippancy that made Pia grate her teeth. I'd say Moina is the kind of woman who would be good for a brief but exciting dalliance, he said. A fling, as we used to say. But as for anything more lasting, no, I'd say someone like you would be much more to my taste. Pia raised her hand to her ear stud and fingered it delicately as if for reassurance. With a wary smile, she said, Are you flirting with me, Kanai? Can't you tell? He said, grinning. I'm out of practice, she said. Well, we have to do something about that, don't we? He was interrupted by a shout from below. Kanai, Babu! Looking over the parapet, they saw that Fakir was standing on the path below. On catching sight of Pia, he dropped his head and shuffled his feet. Then, after addressing a few words to Kanai, he turned abruptly on his heel and walked away in the direction of the embankment. What did he say? Said Pia. He wanted me to tell you that Horan Naswar will be here tomorrow with the butt party, said Kanai. You can look it over, and if it's okay, you can leave day after tomorrow. Good, cried Pia. I'd better go and organize my stuff. She noticed that the interruption had annoyed Kanai as much as it had pleased her. He was frowning as he said, And I suppose I'd better get back to my uncle's notebook.